Would you believe that over the last year and a half on Lancashire Footnotes we've travelled more than 5,000 miles? Not bad for a county that's only 80 miles long by 40 miles wide. Mind you, a lot of that could be put down to Jeannie McIntosh's terrible driving, or the fact that it's easy to get lost in the mountains when you can't be bothered buying a GPS. Or you've got your head stuffed up your backside most of the time. Whatever the case, we won't be travelling that far this week. It's cold out there, it's still the middle of winter, the hours of daylight are far too short to travel any distance, and to be honest, we just couldn't be bothered. So, Garstang it is then, via Shireshead and Forton, just to add a touch of eclecticism en route. Shireshead Church in Forton, also known as St James's, was designed by Leeds-based architectural firm Kelly and Birchall and built between 1887 and 1890. Although it was originally founded in 1520 and back then was known as St Paul's. We're not entirely sure what happened to it in the interim, repurposed as a sheep shed probably. Actually, the history of the church is a bit complicated, as you've probably gathered, especially when you're still recovering from the winter flu, because there are two Shirehead churches, one of which is old and forgotten, the other of which is Victorian and a bit boring, and both of which look remarkably similar, except that one has one bell turret and the other has two. Me and Jeannie McIntosh, with the unerring ability that Jeannie McIntosh has for getting lost, originally stumbled across the older church by accident when we were looking for Forton picnic site one afternoon. Because we're that way inclined, we naturally filmed it. Then we lost the footage when we got home, as you do, so we thought it might be a good idea to go back and film it again. The church is basically in the middle of nowhere, has no apparent history, and apart from being a pleasant, if not plain-looking building, is of no further consequence to the chronology of Lancashire. This is a travel log, not just an historical account of Lancashire, so it's staying in the film anyhow. According to Anthony Hewitson's Northward, some nonconformists had possession of this place of worship for a time after the restoration. Later, it was deserted or fell into disuse. This is the older St Paul's version of Shireshead Church he's talking about here, obviously. About the beginning of the 18th century, Hewitson continued, it was apparently occupied on sufferance by a body of nonconformists, whose tenure, according to tradition, was cut short. One Sunday, while they were worshipping, the Duchess of Hamilton horsewhipped them out of the building. Very Christian of her, it must be said. Not that it prolonged the religious life of the building in any fashion. As we mentioned a few moments ago, the Victorian church, horsewhippings aside, was built about 3/4 of a mile to the west of the original, circa 1890. And, again according to Hewitson, with regard to the elder building, one day I had a look into this old place and found it in a very forlorn, dingy state, a sort of ecclesiastical derelict. As it happens, they like their churches in Forton, especially small stone-built ones that could easily be mistaken for garden sheds. There's the Methodist church for a start, and another one smack bang in the middle of the village itself, opposite the War Memorial. This one doesn't seem to have a name, or any history whatsoever online, despite being surrounded by ancient cottages, but that's the way it goes sometimes. Enough, we've wasted far too much time on that subject now. Let's be off to Garstang, where, just up the footpath from the generally acknowledged Roman cuttings to the fords spanning the River Wyre, you'll find Broom Hill, which, unknown to most of the people who regularly cross its summit, is of a prehistoric construction. Actually, before we follow said river up, let's have a closer gander at those cuttings at the end of Wyre Lane. Formerly recorded as Ridge Lane on Victorian maps. Don't ask us why, we haven't got a clue. 2,000 years old they are, more or less. Cut into the riverbank by Roman soldiers to make crossing the ford that little bit easier on the sandals. which presumably means there's a Roman road somewhere under the grass on the other side of said ford, but that's for another day. And just before we reach Wire Lane, yes, I know that we're going off on more tangents here than an MP being questioned about his taxes. Worth a mention is Hanging Lane, another name now lost to modern buildings, where Garstang's gibbet once stood. I wonder if the kids at Garstang Primary School know that the gallows once stood in their playground, with decaying corpses hanging from them, creaking in the breeze. I suspect not, but it'd certainly liven up lessons if they did. Anyhow, the northwest side of Broom Hill, yes, we got there eventually, has been eaten away over the millennia by the aforementioned River Wire, revealing an extremely rare sight, what appears to be the cross-section of a Bronze Age tumulus. From the riverbank you can see how the hill was built, or at least you can, if the river isn't quite as high as it was when we were there, thus preventing us from filming it. Nonetheless, huge boulders were laid down for the base, growing smaller in size towards the top, the whole earthwork being filled in with sand as its ancient engineers progressed. As for its original purpose, well, that's where the gloves come off. In 1999, several members of the Pilling Historical Society visited the site and recorded that, over the years, many ideas as to the purpose of this artificial mound have been submitted, from an Iron Age forge to a Saxon moot hill where the elders of Garstang met. A more likely theory is that here we have a Bronze Age tumulus, or round barrow, that was used much later in history as a Saxon moot. We prefer to believe it's Thorolf's grave. He was Egil Skallagrimsson's brother, killed at the infamous Battle of Bronnenburg in 937 AD. The exact location of which has now become the stuff of legend, and the cause of more bloodshed in the hallowed halls of academia than the whereabouts of the Holy Grail. But that's because we like to place every legendary historical event the location of which has now been lost around these parts. That was a long sentence. I don't know about you, but I've had enough now. Don't forget to subscribe if you want to, and try to join us again for the next episode if you can.